The Malthari War. Vessel Aurora's resolve floated in the void, its bioluminescent hull shimmering with the soft pulse of atmospheric ionization. The ship was a masterpiece of flowing organic technology. Crystalline silver spires arcing like wind-carved dunes, translucent panels glowing with aurora hues, every surface humming with the quiet power of streaming purple, white energy. It was a vessel designed for elegance, for precision, for the refined art of war as the Malthari understood it. Commander Malvar stood on the observation deck, his four-fingered hands clasped behind his back, watching the distant flicker of human transports approaching. His crest of fine glass, like filaments, normally arranged in perfect symmetry, twitched in barely restrained irritation. The Galactic Council had insisted on this joint training exercise, citing the need for interspecies cohesion, a polite way of saying they wanted the Malthari to babysit the Terrans, to teach them the proper way of warfare. Malvar had seen the reports, of course. Humans were reckless. They came from a Deathworld, a planet so hostile that half its native life forms were actively venomous. Its gravity just slightly too heavy, its weather patterns erratic and violent. They had evolved under constant threat, and it showed in their tactics, brutal, improvisational, wasteful. Malvar's second, Incommand Thalolan, approached, her slender frame casting rippling reflections in the ship's crystalline floor panels. "The human contingent has arrived," she said, her voice carrying the soft chime of Malthari speech. "Their commander requests permission to board." Malvar exhaled through his nasal vents, the sound a whisper of controlled displeasure. "Granted." The humans came aboard like a storm. Their armor was blocky, angular, a stark contrast to the Malthari's flowing aerogel structures. It was practical, not beautiful, scuffed and welded in places, bearing the scars of battles fought in environments no civilized species would dare tread. Their leader, Colonel Webb, removed her helmet, revealing a face that was all sharp angles and sun-weathered skin. Her eyes were the most unsettling thing, dark, unreadable, carrying a weight Malvar couldn't decipher. "Commander Malvar," she said, her voice rough, edged, lacking the harmonic resonance of Malthari speech. "Appreciate the hospitality." Malvar inclined his head, the barest minimum of courtesy. "Colonel Webb, I trust your journey was uneventful." She smirked. "Boring as hell. Perfect trip." The lowlands filaments flickered in confusion. Boring was good in space travel. Why would she sound disappointed? Malvar gestured toward the war room. "We will begin with an overview of the exercise. Galactic standard engagement protocols dictate." Webb held up a hand. "Yeah, about that. My boys and girls don't do standard." A ripple of unease passed through the Malthari officers. Malvar's filaments stiffened. "These protocols exist for a reason. Colonel, they minimize unnecessary casualties, ensure clean engagements." Webb's grin was all teeth. "War isn't clean, Commander, and if you're worried about casualties, you're already losing." The Lowland's fingers twitched toward her datapad, as if to record the heresy. Malvar forced his voice to remain steady. "Then what, precisely, do you propose?" Webb shrugged. "Let's skip the lecture. Run the sim. See how your standard holds up against ours." Malvar almost refused. Almost. But the challenge in her eyes, the sheer certainty, pricked at his pride. "Very well," he said. "Prepare the simulation." As the Malthari crew moved to their stations, Malvar caught Thalan's questioning glance. He gave the slightest shake of his head. "Let them try. The humans would learn." Or a quiet, traitorous thought whispered, "Perhaps we will." Section Fae. Boots on the ground, the simulation chamber hummed to life, its curved crystalline walls shimmering with aurora, like energy flows. Malthari technicians moved with practiced efficiency, their slender fingers dancing across bioluminescent control panels as they initialized the war game parameters. The air itself seemed charged, ionized by the sheer density of power cycling through the chamber's translucent conduits. Malvar watched from the command platform, his filaments twitching in subconscious agitation across the chamber. Colonel Webb stood motionless, her posture relaxed in a way that felt wrong for what was coming. Behind her, Corporal Carter adjusted his tactical rig with the absent-minded precision of a soldier who had done this 1,000 times before. There was no tension in his movements, no hesitation, just the quiet readiness of a predator waiting to strike. The Lowland's voice cut through the hum of the chamber. Simulation parameters set. Standard engagement protocol, urban pacification scenario. Malvar nodded. A clean, controlled exercise. The Malthari doctrine was precise. Isolate hostile elements, neutralize with minimal collateral, secure the objective. He had overseen hundreds of these simulations. They were predictable, efficient. Then the holographic battlefield resolved around them, and the humans moved. Webb didn't wait for a briefing. She didn't consult a tactical readout. She simply acted grid Phi Alpha. She snapped. Carter, take point. Suppression pattern Delta. Carter was already sprinting before she finished speaking, his boots slamming against the simulated pavement with a force that made Malvar's filaments recoil. The human didn't move like a soldier. He moved like a force of nature, eating up ground with terrifying speed. The Malthari response was immediate. Their simulated units fanned out in textbook formation, energy rifles, humming as they swept for targets. Clean lines, controlled advance, and then the humans broke them. Carter didn't engage from the front. He didn't take cover. He vanished, scaling a crumbling facade with inhuman agility, his body twisting through gaps in the simulated architecture that shouldn't have been passable. A Malthari trooper pivoted, rifle rising, only for Webb to appear behind him, her sidearm already pressed to his spine. The simulation registered the kill before the alien could react. Malvar's breath caught. This wasn't warfare. This was butchery. The humans fought like feral things, exploiting every weakness, every blind spot. They didn't just use cover. They became it, melting into the terrain with an instinctual understanding of urban decay that bordered on supernatural. When Malthari forces tried to flank, Webb's team had already repositioned. When they fortified, the humans dug through walls. The Lowland's voice, strained, alert, structural collapse detected in Sector Phi. Malvar's gaze snapped to the readout, just in time to see Carter trigger a controlled demolition, bringing an entire building down onto a Malthari squad, not to kill them, to trap them. Webb's voice cut through the chaos, calm as a surgeon's scalpel. Pincer formation. Cleanup in 3. The simulation ended 60. 3 seconds later, the Lowland's fingers hovered over the console, her usually precise movements unsteady. The readouts glowed accusingly. Malthari casualties. Phi, human casualties. Phi, Malvar's filaments lay flat against his skull. Across the chamber, Webb holstered her sidearm and turned to face him. There was no gloating in her expression, no triumph, just the quiet, unshakable certainty of a woman who had known how this would end. The Lowland finally found her voice. This violates every established doctrine. The collateral damage alone. Webb's smile was thin. You're thinking like occupiers. We think like survivors. She tapped her temple, Deathworlder mindset. Malvar stared at the wreckage of the simulation. His perfect orderly engagement reduced to rubble in under 2 minutes, and the humans hadn't even tried. That was the most terrifying part. Section Phi First Blood, the tactical chamber still hummed with residual energy, the holographic wreckage of the simulation flickering like dying embers. The Lowland's bioluminescent markings pulsed erratically, her normally composed features tight with something between disbelief and dread. She had spent cycles studying war, its patterns, its mathematics, its elegant geometries of force and counterforce. But this was not war. This was butchery. Malvar's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, a reflexive defense against the data still scorching his retinas. His filaments remained pressed flat against his skull, a subconscious admission of vulnerability. The humans had not just defeated his strategy, They had erased it, reduced it to ash in the span of a single breath. And they had done so laughing. That was what haunted him most. The way the human soldiers had moved, fluid, unhurried, as if this were not a battle, but a training exercise. The way their comms had crackled with casual banter even as they dismantled his forces. The way Corporal Carter had whistled while reloading. Malvar had seen warriors of 100 species fight, the Varians with their disciplined phalanxes, the Krix with their berserker frenzies, even the cold, calculating drone swarms of the Silith. None of them had ever made war seem so effortless. Across the chamber, Colonel Webb stood with her arms crossed, watching them, not with the smugness of a victor, but with the quiet patience of a teacher waiting for a student to grasp a fundamental truth. Thalolan finally broke the silence. "Your tactics, they're insane." Her voice wavered slightly, the harmonics of her native tongue betraying stress. "You deliberately drew fire into civilian sectors. You collapsed 2 entire hab blocks as a distraction." Webb's expression didn't change. Yes, Thalolan's frills flared. "That's monstrous." For the first time, something dark flickered in Webb's eyes. No, monstrous is letting an enemy dig in. Monstrous is fighting a war of attrition when you could end it in minutes. She stepped forward, and despite her smaller frame, the Malthari instinctively tensed. "You keep talking about acceptable losses, but Terrier's no such thing. Not to us. Every second a fight drags on is another second our people die, so we don't let it drag on." Malvar found his voice. "You're saying you engineer massacres?" Webb's lips twitched, not a smile, something colder. "We engineer certainty." A chime sounded, the simulation resetting. Thalolan's fingers danced over the console, pulling up the playback. The holograms shimmered, replaying the engagement in slow motion. Malvar watched as the human fire teams moved, not as individual units, but as a single organism, flanking maneuvers executed with terrifying synchronicity. Suppressive fire that herded Malthari troops into kill zones like cattle. And the explosives, gods. The explosives, rigged not just to destroy, but to shape the battlefield, funneling the enemy into positions where they could be annihilated in seconds. It wasn't just skill. It wasn't just training. It was instinct. The kind of instinct honed on a world where predators had hunted humanity for millennia before they ever learned to hold a spear. The kind of instinct that turned every alley, every corridor, every patch of cover into a potential death trap. The playback reached the final moments, the pincer formation closing, the last Malthari positions being overrun. Corporal Carter's squad breached a command bunker, their movements precise, economical. No wasted motion, no hesitation, and then Carter did something that made Malvar's blood run cold. He checked his corners. A simple thing, a reflexive thing, the kind of thing you did when you expected enemies to be hiding in every shadow. The simulation froze. Thalolan exhaled sharply, her bioluminescence dimming. You assume hostility in every scenario." Webb nodded. "We call it situational awareness. On Earth, if you don't have it, you die." She tilted her head. "How many of your soldiers cleared rooms like that?" Malvar didn't answer. He didn't need to. Malthari doctrine emphasized orderly advances, set-piece engagements. Room clearing was a formality, not a life or death ritual. The colonel's voice softened, almost pitying. "You've never fought on a Deathworld, have you?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed, because the answer was obvious, and it explained everything. The Malthari war room was silent. The air thick with the hum of bioluminescent panels casting shifting violet shadows across the crystalline walls. Malvar stood motionless, his silver-carved exoskeleton rigid, the weight of Webb's words pressing down on him like gravity from a collapsing star. Deathworld. The term was not unfamiliar, just unthinkable. The Malthari Dominion had catalogued thousands of worlds, classifying them by habitability, resource potential, and threat assessment. Earth had been listed as high risk, a notation usually reserved for worlds with unstable tectonics or aggressive megafauna. But the humans had turned it into a training ground. Thalolan's slender fingers traced the holographic replay of Carter's movements, the simulation frozen mid-motion. The human stance was coiled, predatory, his rifle angled not just at visible threats, but at every shadow, every blind spot. His eyes flickered with a vigilance that bordered on paranoia. Malvar had seen predators on the hunting preserves of Vathar. Sleek, lethal things that moved with the same economy of motion. But those beasts were animals, driven by base hunger. Carter was something else. A thinking, calculating predator who expected violence in every breath. Webb stepped forward, her boots clicking against the aerogel floor. "Your doctrine is elegant," she said, gesturing to the Malthari tactical displays, flowing formations, synchronized advances, the kind of warfare waged by beings who had never known true desperation. But elegance doesn't survive first contact with reality. A ripple passed through the gathered Malthari officers, their bioluminescent patterns flickering in unease. Malvar exhaled slowly, his mandibles tightening. "We have fought wars," he said, his voice measured. "Great wars, against the Kasari Hive, the Void Reapers. We understand battle." Webb's lips twitched, not a smile, something darker. "You understand duels, honor-bound engagements where both sides agree to the rules." She tapped the console, and the simulation reset, Carter's squad advancing again. Their movements sharp, brutal. Humans don't play by rules. We break them, we rewrite them, and then we burn the book. The hologram shifted, showing a new scenario, a Malthari defensive line, their energy shields shimmering in perfect unison. Then, the human response, not a frontal assault, not a flanking maneuver. Shells arced down, not aimed at the shields, but behind them. Concussive blasts shattered the ground, sending razor, sharp shrapnel upward, bypassing the Malthari defenses entirely. Thalolan's breath caught as the simulation played out, Malthari warriors collapsing, their pristine formations dissolving into chaos. "Your shields are impressive," Webb murmured, "but they don't stop the earth itself from killing you." Malvar's claws flexed. This was heresy. War was supposed to be clean, a test of strength, of discipline. Not this. Not a slaughterhouse calculus where every variable was weaponized. Thalolan's voice was barely audible. You engineer suffering." Webb's gaze didn't waver. "We survive." A new image flickered to life, an old recording grainy but unmistakable. Human soldiers in some long-forgotten trench, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. One of them, a figure with a bloodied bandage over his eye, was laughing as he rigged a crude explosive from scrap metal and stolen munitions. That, Webb said softly, was the siege of Varsk Ridge. 12,000 humans against a fortified enemy with orbital supremacy. We won. How? The question hung unspoken. Webb answered it anyway. Because we learned. Because when the ground is poison and the sky rains fire, you don't fight fair, you fight mean. Malvar felt something cold settle in his chest. The humans hadn't just endured their Deathworld. They had embraced it, and now they were bringing that lesson to the stars. The recording flickered out, leaving the Malthari command chamber bathed in the eerie glow of their own bioluminescent panels. The air tasted metallic, charged with the residual ionization of the hollow projectors. Malvar's talons flexed against the smooth, wind-carved surface of the command console, his mind still reeling from the images Webb had shown them. 12,000 humans against orbital supremacy, and they had won. Thalolan's crystalline fingers trembled as he adjusted the atmospheric condensers, the faint hum of the ship's systems doing little to mask the tension in the room. His mind, usually so precise, so ordered, struggled to reconcile what he had just witnessed. The humans didn't just endure impossible odds. They rewrote them. They turned starvation into patience, pain into endurance, and desperation into something far more dangerous, Ingenuity. Across the chamber, Corporal John Carter stood motionless, his expression unreadable. His armor, a matte black composite that drank in the Malthari's ambient aurora light, made him look like a shadow given form. Malvar found himself studying the human, the way his breathing was slow, controlled, the way his fingers rested near his sidearm without tension, as if violence were simply another equation to be solved. How many battles had this one seen? Webb broke the silence, her voice low but carrying the weight of command. You think we're monsters because we don't fight by your rules. But rules are a luxury. She gestured to the projection sphere, now dark. Out there, in the black, Therese, no referee, no honor, just survival. Malvar's crest of sensory spines rippled involuntarily. He had fought in the Nebula Wars, had seen the devastation of plasma lances carving through ships, had watched as entire crews suffocated in the vacuum when their hulls split open. But this was different. The humans didn't just accept death. They used it. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Years ago, during a skirmish near the Kesari Drift, his fleet had encountered a derelict human vessel. The ship had been crippled, its engines dead, its hull pockmarked with weapon impacts. Standard procedure dictated a boarding action, salvage. What you could, leave the rest to the void. But when his warriors had breached the airlock, they found no crew, only traps, pressure plate explosives rigged to doorways, corridors laced with monofilament wire, a final desperate transmission looping on the bridge. Come and get us. They had lost 7 warriors that day, to a ship that was already dead. Malvar exhaled sharply, the memory coiling in his chest like a venomous serpent. He looked at Webb, really looked at her, and for the first time, he understood. Humans didn't fight to win. They fought to make sure you lost, the Lowland. Ever the scientist finally found his voice. Your methods are efficient, but at what cost? You turn your own soldiers into weapons. You sacrifice them. Carter's lips twitched. Not a smile, but something darker. You don't get it, do you? His voice was quiet, almost conversational. We don't sacrifice our people, we avenge them. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Malvar felt the cold certainty of it settle into his bones. The humans weren't just another species to be catalogued, another power to be negotiated with. They were a force of nature, one that had stared into the abyss for millennia and learned to smile back. And now, they had brought that smile to the stars. The chamber's ambient lighting pulsed, casting shifting violet shadows across the walls. Somewhere deep in the ship's crystalline infrastructure, a power conduit hummed, its energy flow steady, inevitable, like what was coming, like what the galaxy would soon face. Malvar straightened, his decision made. Show me more. Webb nodded, her eyes glinting in the half light. The projection sphere flared back to life. The projection sphere's light intensified, swirling into a vortex of violet and silver before resolving into a new scene. A battlefield, but not one Malvar recognized. The terrain was jagged, a nightmare of blackened rock and sulfurous geysers, the sky choked with ash, the air shimmered with heat distortion, and the ground itself seemed to tremble under some distant, unseen bombardment. Malvar's breath caught. This was no training simulation. This was war. Human soldiers moved through the hellscape like wraiths, their armor scorched, their movements precise, despite the chaos. They didn't march in orderly formations like Malthari shock troops. They didn't rely on energy shields or the elegant flowing arcs of plasma artillery. Instead, they adapted darting between cover, using the terrain itself as a weapon, their tactics shifting faster than Malvar could process. One figure stood out among them, a human officer, her face obscured by a visor streaked with soot, Colonel Webb, but younger, harder. The scene flickered, and suddenly the perspective shifted. Malvar was no longer an observer. He was inside it, the heat pressing against his skin, the acrid stench of burning metal, filling his nostrils. A cold, blustery battle line appeared from a distance, their crystalline armor gleaming under the sickly light of a dying star. They advanced in perfect unison, their energy lances humming, their shields interlocking into an impenetrable wall. The humans didn't flinch. Instead, they waited. Malvar's pulse quickened. He knew this tactic. The Malthari phalanx was legendary, a formation that had shattered entire fleets. No species had ever broken it. Then the ground erupted. Not from artillery, not from orbital strikes, from beneath, tunnels. The humans had dug tunnels. Malthari warriors screamed as the earth split beneath them, their perfect formation collapsing into chaos. Human soldiers surged upward like specters from the underworld, their weapons barking in short, controlled bursts. They didn't waste shots. They didn't hesitate. Every movement was calculated, every bullet a sentence. Malvar watched, transfixed, as the humans hunted, not as soldiers, not as warriors, as predators. The projection froze, the scene dissolving back into the cool violet light of the command chamber. Malvar realized his hands were shaking. That, Webb said softly, was the Battle of Carxus. Your people called it a massacre. Malvar swallowed. I've never heard of it. Of course not. Webb's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. The Malthari High Command scrubbed it from the records. A full battalion of your finest warriors wiped out by a single human company. No survivors, no witnesses, just a black mark in your archives, quietly buried. Malvar's mind reeled. The implications were staggering. The Malthari Dominion did not lose. Not like that, not to anyone. Yet here was the proof. Thalolin, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his bioluminescent markings flickering with agitation. This is impossible. Our shields alone should have what? Webb cut him off. Protected you. Your shields are designed to deflect energy weapons, ballistics, concussive force. You never accounted for those, why would you? Most species consider them primitive. She tapped the projection sphere, and another scene materialized, a Malthari cruiser, its elegant flowing hull ruptured by crude kinetic slugs. You rely on elegance, on predictability, on rules. Webb's lips curled, just slightly. We don't. Malvar stared at the wreckage, his thoughts churning. The humans hadn't just defeated the Malthari. They had outthought them. They had taken every assumption, every doctrine, and shattered them like glass. And now they were here, in the heart of Malthari space. A cold realization settled over him. This wasn't a demonstration, it was a warning. The chamber's ambient hum deepened, the ship's crystalline infrastructure resonating with some unseen power surge. The air tasted of ozone. Malvar exhaled slowly. Show me more. The projection sphere flickered, its purple-white energy currents swirling like liquid auroras before resolving into a new scene. One that made Malvar's crystalline skin prickle with unease. A Malthari outpost, nestled within the jagged cliffs of the gas giant's moon. Its architecture, a seamless fusion of organic curves and translucent alloy. The structures pulsed with bioluminescent veins, their energy signatures blending into the ionized atmosphere. It was a fortress, designed to be invisible to conventional scans, its defenses woven into the very winds that howled across the moon's surface. And yet, it had fallen. The footage was grainy, captured by a dying surveillance drone. Shadows moved where no shadows should have been. Silent, fluid, slipping between the outpost's shimmering towers like ghosts. The Malthari sentries, their sensory tendrils extended to detect the faintest electromagnetic whisper, noticed nothing until it was too late. Malvar leaned forward, his fingers tightening around the edge of the projection console. The answer came in fragments, a flicker of motion. Humanoid clad in matte black armor that drank in the light rather than reflected it. No energy signatures, no heat trails, just the faintest distortion in the air, like a mirage in the desert. Then, the first sentry dropped, no sound, no flash of weapons fire. One moment he stood, his bioluminescent markings glowing softly in the dark. The next, he crumpled, his body limp before it even hit the ground. The Lowland's voice was barely a whisper. They walked through our sensors like they weren't even there. Malvar had seen human soldiers before. Brutal, relentless, charging headlong into fire with a ferocity that bordered on insanity. But this was something else. The footage jumped. A Malthari officer, his crystalline carapace shimmering with alarm, turned just in time to see the darkness behind him move. A blade, monomolecular, serrated, sliced through his throat before he could scream. The attacker didn't pause, didn't gloat, just vanished back into the shadows, already hunting the next target. Unseen, Malvar's mind raced. The Malthari had spent millennia perfecting their detection systems, their technology attuned to the subtlest disturbances in energy fields, in atmospheric pressure, in the very flow of charged particles. And yet, these humans had bypassed it all. Webb's voice cut through his thoughts, calm, almost conversational. You think in terms of energy, of frequencies, of signals. We don't. The projection shifted again, this time to a human commando, his armor peeling back just enough to reveal a face smeared with dark paint, his eyes sharp, unblinking. He wasn't using active camouflage, no stealth fields, no jamming. He was simply still. Malvar's breath caught. The human wasn't hiding his presence. He was erasing it, every movement calculated, every breath controlled, his body temperature regulated to match the ambient cold. He moved like the wind itself, felt, but never seen. The lowland's tendrils flickered in agitation. This is impossible. No species has that level of physiological control. Webb didn't smile. We do. The footage fast forwarded. The outpost's central spire, its crystalline core glowing with defensive protocols, suddenly went dark. No explosion, no breach, just silence. Then the slow, creeping realization that something had slipped inside. The final image was the most damning. A single human, standing atop the spire's ruins, his rifle slung casually over one shoulder. Around him, the Malthari lay unconscious, not dead, not even wounded, just neutralized. Malvar's mind reeled. This wasn't warfare as he understood it. This was predation, and humanity had just proven they were the apex hunters of the void. The projection sphere dimmed, its energy dissipating into the chamber's ambient glow. The silence that followed was heavier than the void itself. Malvar exhaled, long and slow. Show me more. The projection sphere had gone dark, but the weight of what Malvar had witnessed lingered like the afterimage of a supernova. His carapace plates shifted uneasily, the faint hum of his circulatory system the only sound in the chamber. Across from him, Colonel Webb stood motionless, her posture relaxed, yet radiating the coiled tension of a predator at rest. The lowland's tendrils twitched in erratic patterns, his bioluminescence pulsing with distress. The energy signatures, those movements, none of it aligns with known biological parameters. How? Webb didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into a pouch at her belt and withdrew a small, unassuming device, a data crystal, its surface etched with Terran script. She placed it on the table between them. It activated with a whisper of light, projecting a new series of images. Malvar leaned forward. This wasn't combat footage. This was training, a barren landscape stretched beneath a blood-red sky, jagged rock formations jutting like broken teeth. Human figures moved through the terrain, their bodies stripped of armor, their only tools, knives and bare hands. They scaled cliffs with no harnesses, their fingers finding purchase where none should exist. They ran for hours without rest, their muscles trembling, but never failing. They submerged themselves in freezing water, holding their breath until their lips turned blue, their hearts slowing to near stillness before resurfacing. And then, the final test. a cavern. Deep underground, pitch black. No light, no sound, no air currents to guide them. Just endless, suffocating darkness. The humans were sent in blindfolded. Malvar watched as they navigated the labyrinth by touch alone, their fingers tracing minute variations in the rock, their ears attuned to the faintest echoes of their own breathing. They moved like ghosts, silent and sure, never faltering, never doubting. One by one, they emerged. This, Webb said quietly, is where we come from. The lowlands' bioluminescence flickered in confusion. A training simulation. Webb shook her head. Earth. The words settled like a blade between Malvar's ribs. He had read the reports, of course. The Malthari archives classified Earth as a category, ex-Deathworld, a planet so hostile that its very existence defied logic. But reading about it was one thing. Seeing it was another. Humans hadn't evolved in the gentle cradle of a stable biosphere. They had clawed their way to dominance in a world that tried to kill them every single day. Gravity that crushed weaker species, storms that could flay flesh from bone, predators that hunted with a viciousness unmatched in the known galaxy. And yet, humans had not only survived, they had thrived. Malvar's mind reeled. This wasn't just training. This was conditioning, a lifetime of hardening, of honing, of forcing the body and mind to endure what should have been impossible. And now, they had brought that same relentless adaptation to the stars. The projection shifted again, this time to a battlefield. Malthari forces, their crystalline armor gleaming under the light of a dying sun, advanced in perfect formation. Their tactics were flawless, their discipline absolute. Then the humans struck, not as an army, not as soldiers, but as animals. They moved in ways that defied logic, their bodies bending and twisting through kill zones that should have been inescapable. They used the terrain like an extension of themselves, vanishing into shadows, reappearing where no living thing should have been able to go. And when they attacked, it wasn't with the clinical precision of war. It was with the brutal efficiency of predators. Malvar's mandibles tightened. The Malthari had always prided themselves on their superior technology, their refined tactics, their mastery of energy-based warfare. But humans had mastered themselves. The projection faded. The chamber returned to its ambient glow. Webb didn't speak. She didn't need to. Malvar exhaled, long and slow, the weight of understanding settling over him like a shroud. He had come here seeking answers. Now, he had them. And for the first time in his long military career, High Commander Malvar of the Malthari sovereignty felt something he had never expected to feel. The silence in the chamber was thick, charged like the air before a lightning strike. Malvar's bioluminescent veins pulsed erratically, betraying the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. The projection had ended, but the images lingered, burned into his mind like scars. Not soldiers, not warriors. The lowland shifted beside him, her crystalline fingers twitching against the smooth surface of the holotable. The scientist had spent cycles studying Deathworlders, theorizing about their resilience, their adaptability. But theory was nothing compared to the visceral reality of what she had just witnessed. The way those humans moved, fluid, relentless, inhuman in their precision. Colonel Webb remained still, her posture relaxed, but her eyes, those dark, unreadable eyes, held a quiet intensity. She had shown them the truth. Now she waited. Malvar's mandibles flexed, the faintest tremor running through them. He had commanded fleets, crushed rebellions, stood unshaken before the might of the galactic conclave. But this was different. The humans had not just survived their training, they had thrived in it. And that changed everything. The Malthari sovereignty had always believed in the supremacy of technology. Their ships were works of art, sleek, organic constructs of flowing silver and violet. Their hulls woven with aerogel lattices that dispersed energy fire, like water over stone. Their weapons were precise, elegant, designed to disable and dominate rather than destroy. But humans built monsters. Malvar remembered the first time he had seen a Terran warship up close. Not the sleek, diplomatic vessels they sent to negotiations, but the real ones, the ones hidden in the dark, waiting. It had been a hulking, angular thing, its armor layered like the scales of some ancient beast. No flowing energy currents, no delicate bioluminescence. Just cold, brutal efficiency. And now, seeing their soldiers in action, it made sense. A Malthari warrior trained for discipline, for control. They learned to harness their energy, to strike with measured force. A human commando trained to end things. Thalolan finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. Your operatives, they do not fight like soldiers. Webb tilted her head slightly. No, they fight like what they are. Webb finished. Survivors. Malvar exhaled sharply. That was the heart of it, wasn't it? The Malthari had evolved on a world of gentle winds and luminous skies. Their battles were clashes of strategy, of technological supremacy. Earth was a crucible, a world of hurricanes and earthquakes, of predators that hunted in the dark, of diseases that ravaged unchecked. Humans hadn't just adapted to their world, they had conquered it. And in doing so, they had forged themselves into something the galaxy had never seen before, something terrifying. Malvar's thoughts spiraled. The implications were staggering. If the Malthari had underestimated human soldiers, what else had they missed? Their ships, their weapons, their doctrine. The galactic conclave had dismissed humanity as reckless, impulsive, a young species, still clinging to primitive instincts. But now, Malvar saw the truth. Those instincts weren't primitive. They were perfected, and if the Malthari ever found themselves on the wrong side of a war with Earth, he didn't let the thought finish. Webb finally moved, stepping forward. You came here to understand us, Commander. Now you do. Malvar met her gaze. For the first time, he didn't see a diplomat. He saw a soldier, and he understood, with cold certainty, that if humanity ever decided the galaxy was its enemy, there would be no stopping them. The storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived. The storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived. Malvar stood motionless in the training hall, his bioluminescent veins pulsing erratically beneath his crystalline skin. The air smelled of ionized ozone and the faint, metallic tang of human sweat. Foreign, yet somehow primal. His mind reeled, replaying the last hours in fractured snapshots. The way the human soldiers had moved through the simulated battlefield, fluid as liquid mercury, relentless as a collapsing star. They hadn't just adapted to the Maltharis' most brutal war simulations, they had rewritten them. Thalolan, the scientist, stood beside him, her silver, veined fingers trembling as she adjusted the holographic data streams. The projections flickered, struggling to process the sheer wrongness of what they had just witnessed. Human physiology wasn't supposed to endure such extremes. Their nervous systems weren't designed to process pain and still function with such chilling precision. Corporal John Carter had taken a simulated plasma burn to the ribs, gritted his teeth, and kept firing. Colonel Janet Webb had laughed when the gravity generators spiked to 3 times standard. Malvar's mandibles tightened. The Malthari had spent centuries refining their combat doctrines, perfecting the harmony of biotech and crystalline warfare. Their soldiers were engineered, each cell optimized for efficiency, each synapse calibrated for flawless tactical response. Humans had none of that, and yet they had won. Not through superior technology, not through genetic perfection, but through something far more terrifying, sheer unrelenting will. Thalolan's voice was barely a whisper. Their pain tolerance, it defies biological limits. Malvar didn't answer. He was too busy watching the humans now, clustered together in the aftermath, their postures loose, their laughter rough but genuine. Carter was passing a canteen to Webb, who took it without hesitation, her fingers brushing his in a gesture, so casual it bordered on sacrilege in Malthari culture. No hierarchy, no hesitation, just trust. That was the second revelation. Malthari soldiers fought as units. Yes, but they were still individuals, bound by discipline and protocol. Humans fought as packs, and a pack, Malvar realized with dawning horror, did not need orders. It did not need perfect communication. It moved as a single organism, each member anticipating the other's actions before they happened. That was why their tactics had seemed so chaotic. They weren't. They were instinctual. Webb turned, catching his gaze. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. Not the look of a diplomat, but a predator assessing prey. Malvar's pulse spiked. She knew exactly what he was thinking. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she raised the canteen, not in a toast, but in silent acknowledgement. "We see you too." The message was clear. The Malthari had come to test humanity. Instead, humanity had tested them, and now the galaxy would never be the same. The war games had ended. The Malthari fleet hung in orbit above the training planetoid, their crystalline ships shimmering with the reflected light of distant stars. Inside the command vessel, Malvar stood at the observation deck, his four-fingered hands resting against the translucent alloy railing. The planet below was scarred. Burn marks from plasma fire, craters from human artillery, and the faint shimmer of residual radiation where their experimental shield breakers had detonated. It looked like a battlefield, because it had been won. Malvar exhaled, his breath fogging the curved glass for a moment, before the atmospheric regulators whisked it away. He had expected a demonstration, a show of force perhaps, a display of human weaponry to be catalogued, analyzed, and inevitably dismissed as crude by Malthari standards. He had not expected this. Behind him, the doors hissed open. Thalolan stepped in, her bioluminescent markings dimmed in the subdued lighting. She moved with the quiet grace of her caste, her robes whispering against the deck. "You're still here," she observed. Malvar didn't turn. "I am." She joined him at the railing, her violet eyes scanning the planet below. "The humans have already begun their withdrawal. Their dropships are lifting off." Malvar's mandibles twitched. "Efficient." Thalolan hesitated. Then softly, "They won, Malvar." Oh, he knew. The war games had been a formality, a test, as much for the Malthari as for the humans. The High Command had assumed superiority, assumed that their centuries of refined warfare, their flawless coordination, their perfection of battle doctrine would render the humans obsolete. They had been wrong. The humans had not fought like soldiers. They had fought like animals. They had fought like predators. Malvar's claws flexed against the railing. He remembered the way their commandos had moved, not in rigid formations, not with the precise choreography of Malthari shock troops, but in a fluid, terrifying synchronicity. They had anticipated each other's movements before signals could be sent. They had adapted to Malthari tactics mid-combat, shifting strategies without hesitation. And their endurance, Malvar shuddered. The humans had fought for hours without rest. Their physiology was a nightmare of redundancy, muscles that didn't fatigue, pain receptors that didn't stop them, a circulatory system that refused to quit. They had taken wounds that would have crippled a Malthari warrior and kept moving, kept fighting, as if injury were nothing more than an inconvenience. Thalolan's voice was quiet. Their medical teams were efficient. Malvar remembered the human medics, rushing into active combat zones, dragging their wounded back without hesitation. No Malthari medic would have dared such recklessness. But the humans, they had done it without thought, because to them, it wasn't recklessness, it was normal. Malvar turned away from the viewport. "We underestimated them." Thalolan's markings pulsed faintly. "We all did." Silence stretched between them. Then, softly, Malvar asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the first human counterattack had shattered his flank. "What happens now?" Thalolan didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted to the planet again, to the fading trails of human dropships ascending through the atmosphere. "Now," she said at last, "we learn." Malvar exhaled. They would learn because the galaxy had just been given a lesson, one it would not soon forget. Humanity was not just another species clawing for a place among the stars. They were something else, something more. And if the Malthari were wise, they would never make the mistake of testing them again. Outside the observation deck, the stars burned cold and distant, but somewhere among them, the humans were already moving on to the next battle, and the galaxy would have to decide. Would it stand in their way? Or would it get out of their way? The choice, Malvar realized, was no longer theirs to make. Humanity had already decided, and the universe would have to adapt.